Turning Point.
Hello and welcome to the show with me, Katerina Kudashkina. Pakistan requests help from Afghan government and the ISAF, which stands for the International Security Assistance Force, to conduct a joint operation against those who organized the school massacre in Peshawar. On Wednesday, Pakistani Chief of Army Staff General Raheel Sharif came to Kabul to meet the top Afghan military and political leaders. Accompanied by the Director General of Inter-Services Intelligence, General Sharif is meeting Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani and International Security Assistance Force Commander General John Campbell. According to Dawn Online, the Army Chief came to discuss with the Afghan military leadership the possibility of a joint military operation by the Pakistani and Afghan armies against handlers of the Peshawar carnage that left 141 people, mostly children, dead. According to the Dawn report, the Army Chief will seek the Afghan military's cooperation for, like they put it, a joint operation to counter terrorism and eliminate militants hiding inside Afghanistan. In fact, the deteriorating security situation in Afghanistan has created huge problems for its neighbors. Pakistan, of course, feels most of the heat, yet there are other countries, particularly in Central Asia, which too are faced with a growing number of security challenges stemming from the situation in Afghanistan. And this is something we're discussing with our guest speaker, Professor Dr. Conrad Schetter, the Director for Research at Bonn International Center for Conversion.
Well, particularly with the focus on Central Asia, I feel that, of course, the now main withdrawal of NATO troops from Afghanistan will have a large impact on the region. I think the first and the most obvious one is what we can observe and what is really of concern over the last years is, of course, the whole question of the opium production in Afghanistan and, of course, of the exit ways of opium from Afghanistan via Pakistan, but also via Central Asia. So the question is to what extent particularly Central Asia, but also Russia and Europe get flooded by drugs from Afghanistan. And I currently see that this is an economy which can't be stopped anymore. In particular, nowadays, when there is not any Afghan state and not any international force, I think this is one tremendous problem for the whole region. The other topic, of course, what I see is the question of militant Islam, and I feel that we could observe over the last years that Afghanistan became the safe haven for Islamists, and the question is to what extent now militant Islamism will become stronger in Central Asia from Afghanistan.
So is there any connection between those two factors?
Well, a very good question. I think it's in Afghanistan even more problematic due to, we can see that in Afghanistan we got a kind of a narco state. This means that not only different of various rebel groups, but also the government is involved into the drug economy. This means that it's not only that the rebel groups are getting their income by this economy, but also the Afghan government. And this makes Afghanistan such a difficult and also dangerous place in the future.
And like you're saying, so to say, feelers of that economy are spreading over to the region. And let's look at Central Asian states, former Soviet republics. What is the condition there? How strong are the state institutions there? And what are the prospects for those republics, drug-wise and security-wise?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you can observe on the one side that, of course, that the authoritarian rule in all these countries gets stronger again. A particularly interesting country here, therefore, an example is Tajikistan, where since the civil war we can observe that the state rule becomes stronger and stronger, in particular fueled by the anxiety about the drugs from Afghanistan and Islamism. So what we can also observe is that all these countries try to completely separate them from Afghanistan, Pakistan, so that this border even becomes more severe than it was in the past. And I think particular what I find interesting is still in Central Asia, that all the states are not really eager in cooperation. This means that you got always a very strongly national identity, a very strong national focus, which halts on the borders of their own country, and any kind of cooperation is not wanted in this current stage. And I think that particular in respect to all these tremendous challenges the region is facing, this cooperation will be needed in future. Particularly if we talk about militant Islam, I mean, this is a topic which is an issue, a challenge which is faced by all these countries, and they all have to cope with it. And I think you can do it much better if you're doing this in a concise and cooperative way. The same is true, for example, for drug economy.
This is Burning Point. We're discussing the deteriorating security situation in Afghanistan and problems it creates for the country's neighbors. Our guest speaker is Dr. Conrad Schetter, the Director for Research at Bonn International Center for Conversion. Could there be any third factor which could come into play and bring all those states under a single umbrella, so to say? We know that Turkey has been making attempts over quite a number of years to increase its presence there and promote its own ideology. I mean, the Turkoman Empire thing, something. Has it worked? Has it not worked? And how do you see that?
The interesting thing is that Central Asia again becomes the heartland of geopolitical interests, and that more or less we got you mentioned Turkey, we got China, we got Russia, United States for sure, Europe, who all see Central Asia as a politically very fascinating, interesting place, but also a place which is rich in resources. So one region where all try somehow to have an influence, and this leads somehow to a new kind of geopolitical battle where all these agencies try to have a certain influence on. The same is, for example, also true for India or for Iran. On the other side, what they are all doing is playing their own national games, and this doesn't help Central Asia. So I'm afraid that the Central Asian states become nervous if there are so strong national interests by these mentioned countries. Perhaps one step might be the Shanghai Cooperation, in which also Russia and China are part of, where this is kind of cooperation where Central Asian states feel a bit more wanted than in this kind of national cooperations. But even I think one of the main problems is that even the Central Asian states don't like to be called Central Asian states. They're all saying, take Kazakhstan, they feel so strongly related to Europe. Take Turkmenistan, which is isolated themselves. So their own national roadmaps to the future, and they are all somehow try to avoid to be mentioned as one kind of Central Asian unit. And I think this is something one has perhaps also to break up and to consider these national identities much stronger and to find ways for all these own countries. But nevertheless, I feel that a cooperation, particularly in these fields, also in the fields like natural resource management, is needed.
Does that imply that European politicians are aware of those preferences in these states? Are they somehow making use of them?
No. I think in Europe there's a wide ignorance about the national identities and perceptions in Central Asia. From the perspective of Germany or of France, Central Asia is always seen as one unit, and these different perspectives, in this particular, these national sensitivities are not taken into consideration. And I feel that they have to bear in mind.
If we talk about the strategies of other major players you've been mentioning, China and the US, could we compare them in that region?
No, because I think the interests are different one. For China, it's, of course, a strong hunger for energies, what is driving their interest in Central Asia. But also one has to say that the Central Asians become nervous about China because there are tendencies that the Chinese have also some other interests in Central Asia. The Americans' interest is much stronger related to their bases in Afghanistan, and particularly also much more related to Russia. And the Russian interests are very strongly guided by Soviet sentiments, I would say. Particularly also one has to consider that Russian is still a very important language in Central Asia, that many Russians are living in Central Asia. So these are issues which are coming in. So I would say that all these different players got their own unique interest in that region. Take Turkey, as you mentioned, in the Turkish language, the idea of the Turkoman plays a role. Iran got very strong connections to Tajikistan, within the Iranian language, Farsi plays a huge role. So these are more or less all different interests in that region.
Our guest speaker is Dr. Conrad Schetter, the Director for Research at Bonn International Center for Conversion.
Burning Point.
Does Caucasus play a role?
I think the Caucasus plays a role in a different way because I think there are other players are coming in, and it's of course much closer seen to the current situation in the eastern Ukraine. Particular, I think that the Georgia is one of the main player is here coming in, particularly with its opposition to Russia. And the other thing, I feel that it's important that you're mentioning Caucasus, because I feel that the conflict about Nagorno-Karabakh is one which is on high time, which is increasing. I think we often forget about this conflict, and we don't see that we currently can observe that Armenia as well as Azerbaijan, that both invest highly in the military, and that this conflict is not over, but it's still a very hot conflict here. But here I think it's interesting that Russia is in cooperation with both countries. So here we see a completely different dynamic.
And curiously enough, that raises the role of Turkey.
Right, yeah. I think that Turkey here, because of the vicinity to its own borders, has here a strong interest. In general, I think we can observe that Turkey becomes a much stronger player than in the years 5 or 10 years back. So Turkey really sees itself as one of the strong players in the Caucasus as well as Central Asia. In particular, due to the Ukraine crisis, it becomes also a much more important player from the Western perspective.
All those countries we've been mentioning used to be the countries of particular interest for the UK in 19th and early 20th century. Yeah. Have the British retained their interest in the region now, and how is it manifested?
You're right. I think this whole belt, this whole region was of tremendous interest for Britain, particularly during the 19th century. I think that this changed just because the Britain lost or gave up all their colonies in the Middle East and in Asia. It was always a way that Central Asia and Afghanistan in the so-called Great Game was seen as a buffer zone towards India. And the same was true for the Ottoman Empire in respect to their colonies in the Middle East. Since Great Britain lost these colonies, what we can observe is that Great Britain does not anymore focus on that region so much. Here the interests are much stronger in South Asia, in this cooperation with South Asia, but I see them not anymore as a strong player in this particular region. I think that this is something where they completely lost their interest.
So, just to sum it up, the main challenges for the region, do I get it right, that they are opium trade, militant Islam, and the mere fact that this region has once again become the focus of interest of major international players? Right.
And an additional thing, of course, the fear is, of course, that the civil war we have currently in Afghanistan, that this could increase and also move into Central Asia. So I think Central Asia is still a very unstable region, and there's always a fear, particular places like Fergana Valley, that their kind of civil war could come up. And I think everyone has got a strong interest that this should be avoided.
Professor, thank you very much.
Welcome.
And just to remind you, our guest speaker was Dr. Conrad Schetter, the Director for Research at Bonn International Center for Conversion. And with this, we end this edition of Burning Point, brought to you by me, Katerina Kudashkina. Thank you so much for staying with us. Goodbye and take care.